understanding most developers want to work on hard things, right? Complex things that take a lot of time, a lot of thought to build out the best solution possible. In traditional development, you have things like you need to set up your web servers and your front end, your back end, and make everything communicate and your databases. And when I moved over into Salesforce, everything was kind of just there. And that made things super quick to get it done. And that's probably what made me fall in love in the beginning. It was how fast you could take an idea and turn it into reality without the overhead of like setup and configuration that you have to do in a lot of traditional development.
Welcome to Salesforce Radio, your destination for insights, news, and community connections within the dynamic Salesforce ecosystem.
Okay, very excited to host today's guest on Salesforce Radio, Warren Walters, Salesforce MVP, and a big resource for anyone looking to learn more about development in Salesforce. And very excited to speak with you today, Warren.
Hey, Ben. Happy to be on. Super excited to be here finally. I've listened to a bunch of shows and I guess I'm honored to actually be on the podcast.
Thanks. It's definitely an honor for us as well. And it's cool because we've had a bunch of different types of people come on the podcast so far. And, you know, we've had some kind of accidental admin stories, a lot of those. We have not had anyone who is a Salesforce developer by title or by trade. So I'm excited to have you and to really learn about what it means to you to be a Salesforce developer, especially in this ever-changing kind of ecosystem. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Cool. So, Warren Walters. I am a Salesforce MVP. I think I have 18 certifications right now, but they fluctuate depending on whichever ones they want to retire and all that stuff. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for probably, it's either like 9 or 10 years. I need to probably nail that down pretty soon. But doing various things, but always in the development realm. So either when I was in consulting, I was leading the development team and doing lots of training there. I was in-house doing lots of development work. And I guess over that entire point of time, I like to share my development knowledge, probably because I talk way too much about Salesforce, but I've got the YouTube channel that's very focused on development, and then lots of different mentorship opportunities and courses that really, my goal is just to kind of break down the barriers of learning code, to let everybody know that they can learn it. It's not anything like too scary. It just takes time to, get through the basics and the fundamentals, and it's going to help out your career in many different ways. Even if you're not a developer day in and day out, it's still important to learn this stuff. So,
love it. And so before you came into the Salesforce ecosystem and got started with Salesforce, did you have experience in dev work? Were you interested in coding before that, or is this something that came from Salesforce?
Yeah, that's kind of a cool journey that I took. So in high school, I was super interested in robotics, and that led me down the path of coding because, you can build the little robots and all of their servos and their joints and all of that stuff, but you have to write code to actually make it move. So I was on a little robotics team, and we needed somebody to act. That was part of our project, is making them move. And everybody was kind of afraid of it. So I took charge from that standpoint. And from there, I just kind of stuck with coding because I found it super interesting, right? It's just problem solving at the end of the day. So from that kind of start in high school, I went on to college and studied programming there. And then I landed an internship at just, any old company, right? You hear, you need an internship. So I just picked anyone, and I landed the internship, and surprisingly enough, the tool that I was working on was Salesforce. I knew nothing about it at that particular time, but as I was going through, and a lot of it was data entry, building reports in the beginning, and then we ran into a roadblock, and my manager at the time was like, oh, we're going to have to call this consultant to write this code and do all of this other stuff. And this was 10 years ago. So there's barely any trailhead or anything that can really help you out. None of the communities really exist. It's just SFTC Fox on the Stack Exchange helping people out. But anyways, there wasn't too many resources to go to, but I was like, okay, let me give this a try. I'm learning code in school. Let me give this a try. And then from there, I just kind of stuck with it, right? I wrote my first trigger. I think there was a Visual Force page component. That's how you can tell how old it is, right? There's a Visual Force component with it. and just kind of knocked that out. And any additional things that came up, I just kind of stuck with it. So from there, I moved on from that company and really dove headlong into Salesforce development. And as I was going through that journey, seeing the lack of resources and other people like ask me questions about Salesforce development, I was really big on kind of like documenting it either in blogs or in the YouTube channel. And that's how that all kind of started. But I just stuck with it for a long time, learned the basics, and it's kind of an accidental developer story because, I didn't seek out Salesforce development. It kind of found me. But overall, I've been very happy like being in this ecosystem and the accident of taking that internship and then jumping into Salesforce.
Right. So in your case, maybe it's an accidental Salesforce developer, but not an accidental developer at this point. You've been sticking with it for a long time and learning the different parts of it. And obviously, when we get into coding, there's different languages and Salesforce kind of has its own language. What was the transition like in that first kind of use case that you were solving for when you were going from, learning in school where you're doing certain projects, a lot of it's theoretical, some of it's hands-on, and then you're all of a sudden in a real life business scenario trying to solve for a problem. You're not even an employer, you're an intern, you're a college intern, and you're like, hey, maybe I can, maybe I can solve this for you. What was that like?
Yeah, at first it was kind of scary because they were trusting me in building this thing out. But I think that's the awesome thing about internships and people giving you a chance. Like you're a skilled individual. Everybody has skills that they can build upon and work from. So from that standpoint, it was really exciting to be able to build something out myself that wasn't cookie cutter or boxed in based on school. Because like you mentioned, it was a lot of theory in school and it kind of got, I don't want to say boring, but what was excited for me was when I got like a project in school, didn't have too much direction, and then you can go and build and make it your own. So the internship, the first coding project that I worked on was really that, because my managers weren't coders and they're like, all right, this is what we need done at the end of the day, go off and figure it out. And I wrote lots of bad code and did bad practices. I went back like years later and saw some of that code and I was like, what is going on? But it's really about that process for building, your skill set and building it up. So the first project was really cool, but definitely kind of scary. But we were able to like build something out. And in comparison with school, having it really cookie cutter, it's kind of night and day, because in traditional development, you have things like you need to set up your web servers and your front end, your back end, and make everything communicate, and your databases. And when I moved over into Salesforce, everything was kind of just there, especially with like the SQL queries being built into the language. And that made things super quick to get it done. And that's probably what made me fall in love in the beginning, was how fast you could take an idea, either a business logic or whatever, and turn it into reality without like the overhead of like setup and configuration that you have to do in a lot of traditional development.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I like that perspective. It's not something that I'm so familiar with, but basically what you're saying is that when you're in Salesforce, doing dev work, it gets basically put into the play right away, and you don't have to make sure that all these other elements and layers are there. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about kind of what we do at Titan, because, we have a no-code platform for Salesforce. It handles a myriad of use cases, any type of external user kind of use case where, maybe you have a process that's involving a customer or a client, and it's a no-code tool. So sometimes people say, hey, is this something that's meant to replace the development? It's like, no. And when I speak to developers, a lot of times their number one complaint is, we're wasting all this time doing things that should be able to be done with like simple automation or a no code tool like yours, and we get requests from all over the company in different places, and it's really difficult. We don't have the resources to be doing like these kind of small patching projects all the time when we want to work on bigger things. So maybe you can explain to me as a layman, when it comes to Salesforce dev, where is Salesforce development crucial? Where is it necessary? Maybe where is it maybe necessary? And where is it totally not necessary? And obviously today is much different than, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey and like where you think Salesforce Dev fits into things now.
I think you hit the nail on the head with understanding most developers, they want to work on hard things, right? Complex things that take a lot of time, a lot of thought to build out the best solution possible. Generally, if we're working on like either little changes or things that should already be either made into the platform or exist in other third-party tools like Titan, then it kind of takes away from what we want to be doing, which are like fun, complex scenarios. So a lot of what I talk about is, and what a lot of other devs too, it's like, how can we use the best tool for the situation, right? You need a form builder to be able to take in external information. Look for a tool like Titan. If you're, building simple automations that maybe you're just updating a name or an email that comes into the system, okay, it's fine to use flows for those types of things. But when you're talking about large scale data moving around, multi-step processes, then you need to look into code, especially if it needs to like work 100% of the time. It has like different governor limits that you're ending up hitting. Then you need to look into development because you have more fine-tuned controls over, what can happen and when certain things are able to get done. Now, flows and have come a long way, but they're still not at that deep level that you get under the hood with code to be able to like fine tune whatever you want to get done. But it's really, back to what I was saying earlier, use the best tool for the situation. And a lot of it is like a gradual step, right? Maybe it's you start out with flows or approval processes. Then, okay, we've kind of outgrown that. Let's move into an App Exchange product. Titan looks like a great fit, or some other tool looks like a great fit. Okay, this is working great, but now we need to add some additional complexity onto that process. So maybe there's an integration that we're going to need to send additional data in, right? So that's when you want to step into the Apex realm and start, working on those things. But it's generally, you don't want to start out with Apex unless, you have that forethought and like an architect has designed it that way. You want to work with the path of least resistance, work your way up into like using Apex and getting those things done. But oftentimes you'll see there are a lot of things in an org just are complex that need to get done in Apex, or just how knowing those like coding concepts can really help you create like better flows, formula fields, and work with tools that you install in your org.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that resonates with me and speaking to people, and obviously a lot of people I talk to kind of come to a certain point in the development of their work where they're like, okay, we've hit a wall. We want to do something more. Let's look at a no-code tool. And sometimes, infrequently, you know what? We're just going to solve this with a little bit of custom dev in the org. And, sometimes I think that's the right decision. Sometimes, obviously, as you're saying, it isn't necessarily the path of least resistance, because all of a sudden, a year from now, when they want to change that process, they don't have that same developer anymore on staff. They need to redo the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like anything, right? For you, what's like a dream project? Like, what's a project that if I put it on the table right now, you'd say, I'm taking it, like,
That's a really cool question. I like working with integrations, especially bidirectional ones. So bidirectional meaning like we're sending data out of Salesforce, and then we're the other system is sending data into Salesforce. So there's like a little bit of play between there where you have to potentially decide what happens when both systems have the same records or information is out of sync. How often do you send those values? Because, if you could easily blow through your governor limits if you don't, think about that kind of stuff. Other than that, I like Lightning Web Component projects. So building out custom UI, even though I claim I'm pretty bad at it. Like I don't have that designer type of eye, but really when you click that button, create a record or whatever, I like that process behind the scenes, especially where it's like, okay, we're going to take all of this information, turn it up, create records, send out emails and all of that stuff. I get super excited about that because as an end user, you get to see the results of our code right on the screen, right? I think Titan is kind of a good example of that, right? You're able to drag and drop and put stuff on the screen, and people are like happy about that because you can actually see the fruits of your labor. Sometimes when you work a lot in the back end of codes, like heavy Apex and more process automations, you don't see, you don't actively see the results of what you're doing, but you know it's working. Like, I don't know, when you get, the batch updates or the emails get sent out, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned the end user in Salesforce. And, one of the cool things about Salesforce, actually, I think I talked about this in the episode 2 of the podcast with the guys who wrote the about AI for dev and Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about how revolutionary it was when Salesforce first gave you the ability to be able to change the display pages, the layouts in Salesforce. Yeah. Like that was like, for those guys who came from a background in tech and in dev, they were like, this is incredible that you can like just change, just change the layout. And when I was just getting started in Salesforce, even from an end user perspective, and I saw how Salesforce allows you to, convert a lead to an opportunity, an account, and a contact, that's the standard functionality. Even if you just wanted to start kind of playing with that and changing it, how much thought it really took, right? And I think one of the cool things about Salesforce is that the actual starting point really is so high from a software perspective in terms of what's actually happening behind the scenes and the flexibility it's giving you. End user has a hard time appreciating that. And when someone like you gets in there and they start changing things, they start doing, a little bit of dev work to make, the data go out and the data go back in the way that makes the most sense for the business. It's always sometimes hard to appreciate because of how smooth the UI can actually be. And I've seen that a couple times in my, kind of journey over the last several years.
Yeah. One thing on that, it's like Salesforce out of the box has so much that kind of we take for granted because of how it works. I've used a lot of systems just because of, being in consulting and having to either migrate systems or make them work together. And like in comparison, it's hard to kind of believe like how other companies have made it this far with like either bad systems that don't work, they're clunky, they're slow, and like Salesforce has its own fault, right? It can be slow sometimes, but in comparison to a lot of other either CRMs or tools that people build, it has a lot going for it. And then being able to extend that platform, like with App Exchange tools, with code, with flows, it's a lot to take in, especially from the dev side, because like I know what it takes to just build a couple forms, right, and make them, work together and do an email. Like that's potentially a lot of work, but having a whole platform that can do all of that, have business processes on top of it, have automations on top of it, it kind of, blows your mind when you think about it for too long. So yeah, I think that's really what like drew me into the system, way back when, is like how easy it is to build on it and see the results like lightning speed, right? I guess that's a pun intended, right? It's just,
you were saying it before it was lightning.
Yeah, really. I remember that switch over, and that was not fun. You talk about being slow in the beginning and then finally getting to where it's going to be, right, where it needed to be. But yeah, it's just been a really great journey, and like I understand from the dev side how much work it goes into making like a system this big run fairly smoothly for millions of people at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing, and seeing people use it all over the world and different ways they use it. And, from a simple use case or a simple org structure to extremely complex. And I'm never, bored with learning about the way people are using Salesforce. And I think that's really cool. Just that kind of dynamic nature of the system and of the ecosystem as a result is powerful for me. Going back to your journey. So we started with your internship. Where did things go from there?
Oh, man. I bopped around a bunch, probably because I liked learning very fast. So I was at maybe 2 or 3 in-house roles for maybe a year and a half each. And then I finally landed in consulting, and that was like the perfect fit for me because I was in an org. And, every month I was in a different org, learning something new and jumping on different projects. So if you're similar to me, if that kind of resonates with you, I would recommend trying to get into consulting because like I just wanted to consume as much Salesforce as possible. And it really helped me, learn integrations a ton and learn batch asynchronous processes and triggers and how to get all of that to work successfully, ideally all the time, because as a consultant, you're going to like leave that org eventually. So you want it to work, as much or at scale and be maintainable for whoever you leave it for. So that was really important, journey. So I spent maybe 3 or 4 years in consulting. And then more recently, I was at an app exchange partner doing just learning that because I've just never done it before. And that was really exciting because it's just a whole different like mindset and processes and deployment organization that you have to do, because once again, this code is being packaged up and delivered to millions of orgs out there. So it needs to work all the time, and your impressions are very important, right? You don't want to deliver a product and then it doesn't work and then, get bad reviews or they're telling other customers about it. So it's very important to make sure that when you're delivering, especially on the app exchange, like everything is going to work properly. And then lastly, more recently, I'm starting like full-time Salesforce development education, right? So just bringing people in, teaching them development, making more content online about it, and really just amping that up because I get a lot of joy and energy from that. And I love to see people like progress in the realm of development. So yeah, I think that's kind of the wibbly wobbly journey of it. I'm happy to dive into any specifics more, based on your questions.
Well, I definitely want to hear a little bit more about the educational side and what you're doing today. But before that, going back to being a consultant, what type of organizations were you consulting for? Was there a certain industry, certain vertical, certain size, or was it all over the place?
Yeah, for the beginning half of my consulting journey, it was definitely all over the place. It was a bit of a more boutique consulting firm, so we took whatever projects came in. They were more small to medium businesses, and it could be as simple as standing up the Salesforce org, so getting it set up for that organization at the beginning, to doing complex integrations, full on community build outs or experience site build outs for like doctors' offices, which was really cool. So that was very fun, but I wore all the hats, right? I was QA development, and you learn a lot in that ecosystem. And then I moved on to do to a more medium-sized consulting firm. And there we started approaching like mid to large size companies where they have more process, they have more people that they can design out the entire system in the beginning and really start to figure out what is the best way of building out your Salesforce instance. So that was really fun because we got more of that enterprise type of structure, which you don't really see in the more scrappy, like small business. And that teaches you, especially on the dev side, more architecture, like how do you design Salesforce as an overall system? How do you make that work with other programs, entities, and make sure that the company is getting the ROI, the return on investment for potentially a large purchase, right? They're purchasing Salesforce, and they need a consultant to come in and either stand it up or fix whatever they need to fix. So it was really fun. Definitely enjoyed it. It is hard, right? If you're looking to jump into consulting, it is.
Sure.
Yeah, it's something that you can easily get burnt out on. But what do they say? Like 1 year in consulting is 3 years in-house kind of thing. So you just have to be aware of the trade-offs that come with it.
I think you touched on something interesting there, which is the difference between, or the difference of perspective between the Salesforce dev who's day in and day out in the system, working on very specific micro problems that are part of macro solutions, and the architect. So when you came in and all of a sudden you're looking at bigger orgs and you're thinking, okay, now I have to start thinking much bigger. How did you make that shift in mindset to say, okay, now I have to look at kind of the bigger picture and a big org, and how's my solution that's going to serve a bigger purpose going to work within this much bigger, mechanism?
Yeah. Some of it is failing, right? You're building out, you're thinking ideally very small for a large organization, and you build it and you're like, okay, here it is. And their IT department or somebody else tests the code and they're like, this isn't working anymore. This works for one record, not 1 million, right? So a lot of that stuff, you learn pretty quickly that you need to shift the questions you're asking and how you're building things out. Like, of course, doing all the best practices like bulkifying your code and having trigger frameworks and all of that stuff. But it's really about like, okay, we're not thinking about this one small piece. How can you expand that out? So I read a lot of books, and I had really great mentors at the time at the larger companies, right? Because you'll have a development team at larger consulting firms, and you'll have architects there. So there are people that you can pull from and ask questions. So that is definitely one thing that expanded my development knowledge, was to work at a larger firm with other people who were either smarter than you, ahead of you in certain areas, so that you can, ingest more information around it. And then you just take all of that, and ideally you're going to build out a better solution because you're thinking more on a like architect level, enterprise scale. But some of my projects, I was just like, individual contributor, just needed to write the code that was created or set up by a architect and stuff like that. But then especially towards the later half of my consulting career, I was kind of being like development / architect, where I had to design full systems, or at least the technical part, like doing a technical architect, where it's like, okay, we have 3 different systems that need to talk to each other. How can we make it work and scale it so that it works for, millions of records, that kind of stuff?
It makes me think of the idea that, and it was a big thing, I think, 2 years ago, talking just about, hey, there's a big shortage of Salesforce devs, right? It was kind of big news like two years ago. Where do you think we're at right now in the ecosystem? Like, is it still high demand for Salesforce devs in organizations? At Salesforce partners have, the newer tools, like the way Flow has gotten now, has that, mitigated that necessity a little bit? Or are we still just in a situation where, hey, we need as many people who can, become Salesforce devs as possible, and let's jump on board?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know for sure that there is still a huge demand for Salesforce devs. Recording this today, there is a more, companies are definitely a little more hesitant to hire as many people as they were like 2 years ago and things like that. But there's I'm still getting DMs pretty much every day looking for dev talent. There's lots of mentees that I work with that are getting lots of outreach, and I'm applying for different jobs. So that is super exciting. But the market is definitely not as, let's say, hot as it was, where you could sneeze Salesforce developer and get a job like it was maybe 2 years ago. That being said, the skill set is still super important, especially with tools like Flows and some of the other low code, no code tools kind of cropping up, because the concepts are still the same, right? An if statement is an if statement, a for loop is a for loop. Or I guess it's just a loop in Flows. But when you understand how those things work, you can transfer them around to anything you need, right? If you can write a if statement in a formula field, it's not hard to graduate to a flow. Right? And if you can write a flow if statement, then it's not too hard to graduate to a basic if statement inside of Apex, right? So it's really about, if you learn those fundamental concepts, you can write and create better automations for your business, right? And that's at the end of the day, right? We want to continue to drive value for the business that we're working in, for the customers that we have. And when you're able to work more efficiently and scale the things that you're creating, having coding knowledge will only increase that value that you bring for the company.
Yeah, I think that's true. And sometimes you'll see a solution, and we'll be presenting a solution to someone, and it's like, okay, well, that's not something really for us, but that's something that you do with a little snippet of Apex, and sometimes you could see the customer on the other end being like, oh my gosh, did he just say Apex? I hope not. I'm about to unplug my computer, act like the power went out, and then it's like, no, we could just give you a line of code, and that's going to handle that part of the process for you. And they're afraid of dev work. They think, hey, I'm paying for Salesforce. Why should I have to do anything beyond the tools it gives me? Why should I have to get another cloud? It's always the same thing, right? But sometimes it's a necessity. sometimes it really, you got to get someone in there to do something that's going to be customized to your needs.
Yeah. I was just going to mention like the education, especially for the end users or the clients, right? The people who purchase Salesforce, because yes, there's a lot that you can do out of the box, but it's very rare that Salesforce is the only tool that you're running your entire business on. Even for like delivery,
Sure.
like the actual product that you have, unless you're on the App Exchange kind of thing, you probably have something else that, you need to work with. So if you're trying to not do swivel chair and work in a bunch of different applications, then you may end up needing either, your Salesforce built out to be custom, or somebody with that expertise that can like either take it to the next level with coding or build out some flows that need to get done.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And so tell us a little bit about what you're doing today to equip people with the skills they need to code in Salesforce, and the understanding that when code is necessary, when it's not necessary, and all that. What are some of your initiatives?
Yeah, so I run Cloud Code Academy, which is a Salesforce development training program. So it is you kind of bring people in who want to learn Salesforce development. I'll take anybody, especially like I'm not trying to gatekeep and say, you need 50 certifications or 10 years in Salesforce administration, because I've found that kind of scares people off, even in the beginning, right? They're like, oh, I can't learn this because that's for the super senior people and that kind of stuff. And I found some of the really great students I have, they just are curious about development and they like pick it up and run with it. So Cloud Code is a kind of like a cohort style. We bring you in with another group of people so that you're learning alongside them and going through learning the basics of development. So these are like fundamental things. If you learn this, you're going to be able to code in like any language, right? I mentioned an if statement as an if statement. If you learn it in Apex, you can do it in Java, you can do it in JavaScript, you can do it in Python, right? You know what the structure looks like. And then you can even translate that down into things like flows and formula fields. So we learn those basics and we move way beyond that, right? We talk about triggers, asynchronous Apex, integrations, Lightning Web Components. We cover a lot over that period of time. And throughout that time, we study for the PD1 exam, right? So ideally, when you come out of this, you're going to be PD1 certified and also be confident in like knowing how development works inside of Salesforce. So yeah, I've been doing that for about a year now, and it's been super exciting to see people come in, grow, various different folks to like senior admins, people just getting started, admins with 5 months of experience, but they're super interested and curious about code, and they've all found different levels of success throughout the program. But that's really what I find energy doing, is training people, talking about code, and kind of breaking down those barriers of like, oh, code is only for the smart people, or it's only for the people that went to school. And like, that's not true at all. I know many devs that could code me into a box and, they have no certs. They didn't go to school for it. They just found it interesting and stuck with it.
I think that's great. I mean, that's taking your story, which was obviously a little bit more based in kind of development skills, but kind of falling into Salesforce and really capitalizing on it and allowing other people to experience a little bit of what you've experienced, which I think is super cool. And I mean, would you ever recommend, are there certain people out there who maybe are just developers who you would say, hey, you should really get involved with Salesforce? What's the pitch to someone like that? Like that's, outside of Salesforce, completely never heard of it, but, wants to be a developer.
Yeah. The, folks, if you have a development background, I would definitely say if you are either in the Java space or like JavaScript, especially Java, because like Apex is a flavor of Java basically. So it's not hard to transition over. And we've had lots of students who were like full Java developers and come and pick up Cloud Code's program and just like run with it because it's very easy for them to pick up. You just need to learn the Salesforce pieces at that point. So definitely if you have a Java background or JavaScript, if you like the front end, back end, because Lightning Web Components, they are JavaScript based, and all of those fundamental things like HTML, CSS, you'll be able to also translate over very quickly. And there's lots and lots of companies looking for Lightning Web Component work because everybody kind of wants a custom UI, right? They want their thing to look like, what their company brand is like, or, they have a particular style that they want it to be in. So Lightning Web Component is also really hot right now. And then like just generally, if you're interested, like maybe you've dabbled in code a little bit, you've taken some like HTML courses or Java courses, like even watch YouTube videos on it, and you kind of found it interesting, I'd recommend diving into it, right? I've got tons of resources on our website and cloudcodeacademy.com, and lots of them are free. So just like try it out and see what happens. If you get energy from it, then I would say stick with it a little bit more and see where things land.
Awesome, Warren. Well, listen, I really appreciate this conversation. I think you gave us a lot of things to think about in terms of where devs fitting in, within the Salesforce ecosystem today, what it would make sense to do in terms of, if you're looking to further yourself. I think definitely checking out Cloud Code Academy would be a great place to start. And, as always in these conversations, really, really appreciate the nature of the Salesforce ecosystem, the amount of people that have, found themselves working and, finding success in Salesforce and wanting to give that on to other people and creating resources like, what you've done with Cloud Code Academy. I think it's just awesome. It's what makes people want to stick around in Salesforce, and see the platform and all the tools succeed in organizations. And I really, can't say how much I appreciate it. And, any other, thoughts from you? Anything else you want to plug or tell people to go, and check out?
No, I appreciate you having me on, Ben. It's been great to talk about this stuff. Other than the major things, you can find me on YouTube, just Walters954, Salesforce Mentor, and Cloud Code Academy. If you're trying to get a little bit deeper into Salesforce development, I'm always around to chat, either on LinkedIn. And it's been really great to start to give back to the community even more. Like I've dabbled in other areas of development, and the Salesforce ecosystem is one of the most like open and inviting communities that are out there. And there's so many different resources you can use to like get started and get moving. So I would say, pick one, just start figuring out what you like and kind of go from there, right? It can be a lot to take in the beginning, but if you're finding energy from this stuff, you're find your like tribe, your community, and something that resonates with you, just stick with it and see what happens.
Warren, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Salesforce Radio.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Salesforce Radio. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting discussions, expert tips, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders. Stay connected with Titan, plus the power of the planet's leading CRM. See you next time.